remember last video where we spent 5 hours trying to find the oil leak on Project Daily? Well, it's not where I said it was. If you guys didn't watch that video, there will be a card up in your top right corner. If you did watch the video, you guys remember that I said I would take it for a drive after I cleaned it up just to make sure it was leaking from there. So when I looked under the hood, the place it was leaking from wasn't actually the valve, but to the right of it. Try to show you guys, but it's really tight in there. If you watched last video, I said it was leaking from this valve right there. And as you can see, there's a lot of oil around there. But it isn't leaking from there, it's leaking from, you see there's a little top, like a port almost. It's leaking from that side, so under the intercooler. And what that means is we have to pull off the intercooler once again. But that's alright to me, because I'm actually going to be doing a couple of adjustments to the hose. Because in the video where we replaced the hoses, they weren't cut the perfect length, so I'm going to recut them. They're just a little bit too long on both. And if you guys didn't see that, the video will also be up in your top right. Out of all the things that I would have to pull, this is probably the easiest. I'm undoing these bolts because this hose down there, pretty much impossible to take off as of now because it's been on there for a very long time. And then here, and just on this side, and then there's the hoses. If you're watching that time lapse very closely, you would notice that I had a massive issue getting the recirc valve off of the intercooler. I think we put way too much RTV on because I eventually ended up using a putty knife and just hacking at it with the mallet, and then once I got a little layer off, I just hit it with the mallet and it eventually came off. But that took way longer than I expected. I actually did even use some heat in there, so that might have helped. So we have the intercooler off and there's so much more room. But the first thing I noticed is actually there's barely any oil sitting in my turbo now, which is probably a good thing. So maybe the seals aren't going on my turbo, which is awesome. But the bad news is this doesn't show where the oil is leaking from. So here is transmission and it's actually straight down past the throttle body. So the next step is I think gonna be pulling the throttle body. It's not too hard. After I got that throttle body off, you could see a lot better. You can actually see right where it's leaking from. And it almost looks to be leaking from this center tube, which after a little bit of research, it is the center crankcase, so it goes across to the valve, so it's a crankcase breather. So a line runs all the way across the engine block and then down to the valve, and then other side down to the valve. And it looks to be leaking from there because you can see the trails of oil almost just going off in all directions from there. The only thing I'm kind of curious about is why isn't it leaking on the other side too? Because it is pretty much up at the top. The reason it's leaking, I believe, is the thing we were talking about last time, the PCV valve. So it's this valve right here, and it allows the pressure to equalize between everything. If it's stuck closed, that's my guess what's happening right now. It's stuck closed, and the crankcase is actually pressurizing, and then it's just blowing out of this tube because it can't equalize. So the plan is we're gonna pull this off next. and see if I can move it around or not. We finally found the leak. It's a little elbow connector. You guys probably can't see it, it won't focus. But there's a little elbow connector and it actually cracked like 3/4 of the way down. It is the crankcase vent, not the PCV, but it is one of the vents that vents the crankcase to the valve covers. And I was correct, it was this little hole right down, right there. That's where it was leaking from. It was all cracked and leaking out the side there. So now we're gonna head over to Subaru and grab the parts and a couple other gaskets that I'm gonna replace. We just left the dealership and we got all the parts but one. And the one part I was thinking they would have, they didn't have. It's the throttle body gasket. But we got everything else. Like we got the whole assembly for the PCV. We got the gasket for the recirc and a couple other things, clamps and that. So we're gonna get everything back together. Shout out to whoever the parts guy is at Subaru Calgary. He helped us out a lot when we didn't know what they were, and they have a really cool system for finding parts. I wish I had. It would have actually helped with the oil leak a lot, trying to find like wiring diagrams and stuff. Parts. Time to put everything back together now. Pretty much we're ready to install everything. The only thing I need to get off is this little white piece, which is being replaced, and this piece down here, the little hose, and the rest is already off and ready to be installed. We just got the bottom piece undone, and it definitely is supposed to be rubber, but listen to it. That sounds like hard plastic.
Yeah, I mean, holy, I can make it crunch. Just get real close.
It's crunching, that's so bad. That's why you replace your hoses, people, after 10 years. Before I start assembling everything though, I wanted to give everything that I can access with the intercooler or any of the hoses a good wipe down and clean. So I just went and cleaned this very back wall here, and then there's like the clutch fluid reservoir, and then straight down I cleaned everything in there. So where it was leaking I gave it a wipe down, and then just all around there. And now it's time to assemble everything again. The one part they didn't have I mentioned was the throttle body gasket, and honestly it's not that big of a deal because the gasket actually doesn't look bad, so I'm just gonna put it on, and then when they get the gasket in, I'm just gonna keep that as a spare in case they do have boost leaks or something. I can just replace it, because now it should be pretty easy for the intercooler to come up in and out as soon as I finish cutting the rest of the hoses. It was much easier getting the hoses over the barbs than taking them off just because they're brand new hoses. They're much more flexible. But there it is, there's the valve with all the different lines running off of it, and there's the elbow joint that was the source of our oil leak. Next is putting on the throttle body and the intercooler, which I will be cutting the hoses as I said before. If you end up ever doing this to your car, these clamps, so the stock ones, they have a little like bubble over them, you can't really see them. They have just two little bumps. They're really hard. I would definitely recommend just getting normal hose clamps, because these are really hard to work with. But if you are having to work with them, this is how you do it. You put your one side there, and you pinch, and it eventually won't fall off like that, but it will lock in place. They're really difficult, like you see, I pried this one off, and here's another broken one. But I just ended up using these kind of clamps because they're easy to remove and put back on, so if I ever have to do any other work, I don't have to do with these. Another thing that I forgot to mention is that I did paint the intercooler bolts because they were just getting a little rusty and stuff. Just a nice flat black, so you can see these are the intake manifold bolts, and then you got the intercooler sides and the recirc valve, just to clean it up a little bit, make the engine bay look a little more pretty. One more thing before we put the intercooler on. So I gotta clean off the RTV, which is on this. So it's pretty easy, just rubs off, honestly. And then I've got to cut the hoses to length. So I'm gonna be cutting this one just a little bit shorter. You can see the dust mark. And then on this one, a little bit shorter as well. To cut the hoses, all you gotta do is tighten the clamp down so it doesn't move. And then take your box knife and just cut on the very edge of it, and it should cut nice and cleanly. If you're ever replacing the intercooler hoses, make sure you cut them right the first time. I cut them right this time, and it was 100 times easier getting that intercooler on than when we first took it off and put the upgraded lines on. So next is bolting this down and bolting this down, and we are done. And there we are, all completed. It's crazy how much you can take apart and put back together in a day and replace parts. So there is the intercoolers all put back together, all the bolts are on, new gaskets. The painted bolts, they actually look pretty good. You don't really notice them, but it's a nice little subtle touch, and it kind of just blends in a lot more. But there we go, we finally got the oil leak repaired in Project Daily, or at least I'm hoping so. I don't think there's anywhere else, or I didn't see anywhere else that leaked. And I also did a little preventative maintenance with the PCV. But hopefully that's all I have to touch for down there for a little bit at least. But that is it for today, or well, tonight now. In the next video, I'll definitely let you know if it was the oil leak, because I'll be monitoring my oil levels and just checking the block periodically to see if there's any oil pooling up on it. That's it today. Until next week, peace out and stay humble.